Okay, finally, the last piece of this session is and wrap up. By now, you all know Mr. Don Frazier. You've heard of him. You've heard him speaking with Education Design Lab. He is the director of the 21st Century Skills Badging Challenge, working with over 20 universities for over 3 years. And, And so he is going to come up and talk to you a little bit about what he's doing. And then finally, as I promised, the UNCF team will be coming up as a firing squad. You guys get to ask us all of the questions you have until 2 o'clock. No, all of the questions you have. Don, and I call Don Frazier.
Thank you. Am I on? Let's see. How's the volume here? I think I may need to turn this up. Okay, great. Thank you. All right, well, this got moved, as Kathleen mentioned, to today. Fortuitous that you all did your evaluations already and won't have a chance to say anything about this here at the end. So thank you for hanging in, because I know it's been a long couple of days, and you all should be commended for the work that you've been able to do thus far, and clearly a lot of great work ahead. Yes, so definitely a round of applause. So over the past couple of days, there's been a lot coming up about core competencies, 21st century skills, the skills gap that Matthew, Dr. Ora talked about at lunch yesterday. So a lot of the speakers have set this up pretty nicely for me, because they've been touching on a lot of the research and some of the practices that are taking place, the entrepreneurs who are working to solve some of these challenges. What we've been doing is really putting theory to practice for the past few years around the 21st Century Skills Badging Challenge. So why do I love this project? For a few different reasons. One, because it's pretty innovative, right? There aren't a lot of people doing this work, particularly in the way that we're taking it on. So that's very aligned with who I am and what I like to do. So we're continuing to kind of pave new roads with every academic year that goes by. Second, because we get to do some deep dives with employers. And by employers, because we use that term very generally, we really are talking about hiring managers, right? The frontline folks who are making these critical decisions. And then third, which is near and dear to me, and you heard this already when I first started talking on the Monday, was that it's about the students. You know, for me personally, it really is about the students. You heard me say that I started my work as a high school guidance counselor. I spent a lot of my work with students from low-income households, students who are first in their family. So that particular population is very near and dear to me. And if you've worked with those folks, as I know many of you have and intimately, you'll know that for a lot of these students, they have a lot of the skills that I'm going to talk about today. Right? I can tell many stories about the students who have demonstrated resilience every single day of their life. Yet, they don't see that as a skill. That is a way of life for them. That is just what they do. Right? And yet we're not telling them, you know, that is a skill that you have that can be applied in other parts of your life, in the classroom, in the other activities that you're doing. Right? So that's a fault of education. We could talk about the students who have to work right after. They go from school to work because they have that job that they need to put money on the table at home. And when the bus doesn't come, they still find a way to get to work because they will lose that job. Right? So they're problem solving. And they're good at that. But are we telling them that that is a skill that is going to be useful to them and for them in other parts of their life. So I just want to frame this discussion with those students in mind, all students, but especially the students that we're talking about here. So first, let's just go along. Imagine a world with no resumes. Oh, people, yeah, no resumes. I don't want to do one again, right? We've all seen them, the good and bad ones, right? So imagine a world with no resumes. And by the way, that might be coming. A world where Brianna, right, our girl Brianna, has to figure out how to impress anonymous keyword algorithms to get through job filters to the interview stage. So stay with me. In this keyword hiring world, the technical skills, right, those may still be pretty straightforward, right? So the technical skills that are generally aligned with a major. People and employers generally understand those. But still, soft skills, quote unquote, are going to be poorly understood by employers. And then when we specifically start talking about liberal arts degrees, we know that becomes problematic. In a keyword hiring world, how then do we translate the power of, for example, a history degree to learning outcomes that can be reduced to keywords? Right? So we're getting underneath the skills here. And I want to put forward also that what are we even talking about when we say core skills, core competencies? Right? And there was that working group here that was one of the larger ones that really have an interest in this. And I think we all recognize this as a huge need. So that takes us to the badging challenge. And we talked about design questions. So this is ours. How might we capture informal learning in ways that are meaningful to employers? And the key word here is informal, right? Because in a lot of our conversations with students, they tell us that the skills that matter most to employers are not being practiced and acquired in the classroom. They're actually being practiced and acquired outside of the classroom. So let's take a look, and some people may have seen this. This comes from Hart Research Associates. They do this survey every couple of years, and whether it's NACE or it's another group, we're all talking about this chart right here and using it in some ways, right? So I know it's difficult for folks in the back to see it, but this is the idea that employers are talking about critical skills that they want to see, and then students are saying whether they believe they have them or not. So the shorter bars are the employers who are saying, yeah, we actually, only 37% of employers are saying, we believe students are well prepared to work with others in teams. 64% of students say that they are well prepared. So the gap is huge, but the other alarming part is just like how low the student numbers even are on this graph, right? So you don't have students saying, 95% of students saying that they are well prepared in critical and analytical thinking. And that really is, the hallmark, right, of higher education, and many colleges will have that in their mission statement. Yet students are saying they're not well prepared, employers are even less so. So what are we doing here at the lab? So we've taken reports like that and others and distilled that to identify the skills that we wanted to drill down on. So critical thinking, I'm not going to list them all, and I know it's hard to see in the back, but critical thinking, creative problem solving, oral communication, collaboration, empathy, resilience, self-efficacy, cross-cultural competency. It turns out I am naming them all, and then being a catalyst. So these are the skills that we've talked to a lot of employers about and we've seen surfaced. So how then do we capture this for students? Well, digital badging has come up, and while we know digital badging is still nascent, people are still leaning in, more so leaning in now than 3 years ago when we started this work, but recognizing that a digital badge could be a discrete signal and an important signal for employers and for students alike. So this is what they look like live. So we've now gotten to this point after this academic year that our badges are now live on our partner Credly's site. And Credly is, if you're not familiar with them, is one of the leaders, if not the leader, in digital badging in higher education. So they're living and breathing, which we're very proud of. How did we get to this point? Well, we worked with a number of universities to get there. So it wasn't the lab and the team that you saw today huddled up thinking about how we construct these, right? We did this work with partner colleges and universities, and they all contributed one badge to the suite of badges, okay? Because if you asked any one school to say, hey, design 9 badges, they would just laugh us out of the room. So they all said, well, we can do one. And they picked the one that they felt was most akin to the work that they were doing, or really just gravitated towards because of what was happening on their campus. So what we learned was that if you're going to build a badge, right, because digital badges in the early days were very participatory in nature, right? We all came to this, and then we could get a badge on the way out around design thinking, right? Because that's how it started in the early days, right? You come and you hear about design thinking, and I get a digital badge in design thinking. Do you really know design thinking, right? You guys have been introduced to it, but if I have a badge, that badge is supposed to be a signal that I really do know something beyond a surface level, that I didn't just show up. So we identified 3 core components. So a knowledge component. And that is not the Merriam-Webster definition of collaboration, right? We all know that we do not want students to just be able to tell us what collaboration means. And by the way, I encourage you to ask your students to define collaboration, because you will get very different answers, and oftentimes it's going to sound like group work, division of labor, teamwork, when it really is well beyond that, right? Because collaboration is an art form, and we all get better at it. So it's deep knowledge, right? That's really critical to understand how to acquire this skill of collaboration, for example. Then assessments, right? If you're going to build a badge that can stand up to to some scrutiny, you want to have assessments connected to it. Now, the word assessment is something that students are going to recoil from, right? Not many students are going to, hey, assessments, excellent, I can't wait. So you have to think about what types of assessments you use that can actually be useful to students. For example, we are working with a partner named Checkster, who's out in California. They actually work predominantly with employers around hiring and identifying talent. They have something that they were using called a 360 report, right? So we said, hey, we think this 360 would be really valuable to our process. So what is a 360 assessment in the badging world? We're asking students to send out a survey and ask 5, 6 adults who know you well to rate you based upon the skill, for example, collaboration, right? And that serves as a great developmental tool for students when they get this report back from trusted source, and they look at it and they can say, wow, I really need to get better here, or it seems like I'm doing well here. And the tech side of it actually gives the students a very nice side-by-side comparison of how they rated themselves and how other people rated them. So it's a great jumping off point. We found it to be very, very helpful at the beginning of the badging process for students. And that's much more useful than something like a raw score. What does a 75 on a critical thinking assessment mean? Right? Not terribly actionable for students. So if you're going to think about assessments, you want to think about meaningful, actionable for students. Finally, an experience and reflection component. Right? You can't stress, obviously you have to do something to earn this badge, right? So you've acquired some knowledge, but there's something that you've done, some experiences that you've had, and this is where we are looking at putting together the learning journey for students. So a set of activities that roll up into the skill itself. So how do you practice and acquire, and what do you do to earn a collaboration badge or an oral communication badge? Like one example in oral communication was delivering an elevator pitch, right? So it allowed students to really quickly, an elevator pitch has to be short and sweet, right? So I have to be very good at communicating in a couple of minutes in an elevator pitch. So it was one of these practices that was included with that particular badge. And the reflection component, again, what we realized that without experiences, in the absence of reflection, just, kind of, it fell flat. But when students were able to kind of step back, what if I videotaped that elevator pitch and then had a reflective conversation around my elevator pitch, right? Like that would be uncomfortable, but we all know that video can be very powerful, right? And we will, oh man, I didn't realize I used my hands that much or said this and that. So we have, again, designed, piloted now, and tested these frameworks that have been developed for each of these skill areas with, hundreds of employers, hundreds of students, 50 plus employers now, several universities. So the work is continuing to evolve. But the process has been one that has allowed us to do this, right? Which is to integrate experiences across the classroom, workplace, extra co-curricular, and even things like, we start to dream about the promise of apprenticeships and how badges could connect up to those. So again, for us, this has just been very eye-opening work that has allowed us to explore areas that really need exploration. And by using our design thinking processes, we've really been able to surface a lot of like the assumptions that are out there, test these, right? So having employers at the table, continually putting something in front of them so they can give us feedback in time so that we can say, people are saying like that we need to do more of this. Oh, well, let's do that then. So a few examples of what some of the schools have been doing, like what do the learning processes look like? So there's a hybrid model, right? So at GMU, George Mason University, what they did was they had Blackboard. They put a lot of their learning on Blackboard, their learning activities. So students were expected to go in, do the learning modules. They had discussion boards online where students were kind of feeding into videos they were watching and other pieces of work that they were doing. And then they came together for these pop-up meetups, right, that were facilitated by like our point of contact at the university. So this was like an example of one of those where they were kind of talking about their learning, like what were they learning, right? And it was a meaning-making session, which again helped make it stickier for students. Arizona also did, as a large university, public university, they never wanted to go in saying, oh, we're only going to do this for 25 students, right? They said, eventually this needs to be offered to everybody. So we have to start online, and they have the D2L platform, so that's the platform they were using, okay? They put their learning online, and again, it was a bit of a hybrid where they were connecting up, where they had students come together at 1 or 2 points along this learning journey. Then there was this kind of fully online experience. This is very different with Bay Path University, which is a small regional college up in Western Mass, where they actually have a corporate model where they were doing badging with corporations around empathy. So they structured it around an empathy, a conference, so the Women's Leadership Conference that had an empathy theme involved. So the participants came into that already taking the 360. So they took the 360, then they came to the conference sort of eyes wide open now, thinking about like empathy as I go to this conference. So really interesting, different way to think about how you can engage people in the badging process. The no one or best way is what we're learning. So I think we've got like 4 key insights here. And by the way, I won't be offended if you got to get up and get the red velvet because it keeps distracting me. It's like right over there, the red velvet. 4 key insights. So transparency and purpose drive student engagement. So what do we mean by that? Being explicit, right? So go back to what I said when I set this up, is that we are not being terribly explicit in general about when and how skills are being acquired and even what those skills are. Like, ask your students, what do you believe the core employer skills are? And see what you come up with, right? And then map those against NACE or ours or any framework that's out there to see, are they in the ballpark right now? Right, so this is a key piece. Awareness is critical. It's just a huge first step. In a blog post that we recently did, I referred back to college access and the awareness around that, right? So in the high school side, it was all about putting up banners of colleges, being really explicit, like teachers would come in and wear sweatshirts with their university name on it, right? Because they just wanted to make sure that you all understand that you can go to college, right? So are we being that explicit at the university level? It sort of wanes from elementary just to like less and less explicit as we go along, and we hope that by the time they're done, they've acquired this, but look where we are. We know that that's not true. Okay, I already mentioned this a little bit, but reflections makes the content even stickier, right? And not just personal reflection, because how many people tell themselves, I'm going to include reflection as part of my practice, and then it just get kind of push down the list of to-dos because something else bubbles up. But if you're pairing with somebody, forcing you to own that, right, and you reflect and they help you reflect, then that could be even more powerful than just self-reflection. They're pushing you and hearing and thinking about things in a way that you're not. Feedback loops accelerate transformation, right? So when I think about what you do to earn a badge and when you're badge worthy, it really is about transformation, right? How did you move the needle for yourself, right? Because if you ask an employer, and this is a quote from an employer, they said, I have a hard time thinking about the badge as that's going to make Don that much better than somebody else. But it gives me a strong indication of their potential, of Don's potential, right? Because I could see underneath that badge to some artifacts that are available. I could see his 360. I can see some pieces of work, his elevator pitch, whatever it might be. So I'm getting a glimpse into his potential. But with the absence of feedback loops, we can't really get there, right? We won't get to transformation unless we're making sure that students are knowing where they are and continually being able to identify how to continue to transform. And then this one is really important. I kind of left it at the end here. So again, a focus on the idea of collaboration, for example, right? That a lot of people are talking about that. Is that what we really should be focusing on? We believe that you need to change your eye level and not think about the macro skill of collaboration, but what do we really mean when we say collaboration? To be an effective collaborator, active listening is important. Understanding diverse perspectives is important. Being solution-focused is important. So those sub-competencies, that's what we call them, that's what we have to make them aware of and get them to practice. Because just saying, go practice collaboration, go all sorts of ways with that, right? But if you're talking about how do you get better at active listening, right? We can come up, and we have come up with practices to do that. So this is really a key piece that we have to just shift our eye level, go deeper. And that's Dr. Ora said that yesterday, talking about we have to get more granular about the skills. So I want to spend the last few minutes, and I'm probably going a little over time here, but I want to leave some time for questions, to just talk about this idea of a T profile. How many people, by show of hands, have heard of a T-shaped learner? Okay, Kathleen, put your hand down, please. I know you've heard of it. Okay, yeah, a few people. So it really came out of like the business world in a lot of ways. And the idea around the T is that, and it's hard to see, but we all know what a T looks like, especially a capital T. We're going not lowercase. So across the top, the horizontal of the T, you would say these are skills that transcend industry. So the types of skills we're talking about here, right? That people identify them as soft skills, power skills, we're saying mobility skills, right? So these skills, it doesn't matter what industry you're in, they're important. And by the way, there are industries that we're learning that say those are more important. Those trump any technical skills. So it makes it even more incumbent upon us as educators, as institutions, to make sure that students actually have these. So, and then what would be the vertical would be the technical skills, right? So that might be something that, again, comes from your major, right? So if I'm a computer science major, I might have some engineering skills in there, some programming skills, and so this could be a progression from bottom to top on a T of like me stacking my technical skills over time. And what we actually did was an experiment with some students at GMU, which I said, bring your resume, and now we gave them sort of a blank T. And we said, put your resume, extract the skills, and just put those in a T form to see what they would do with that, right? So it was a lot of students are immediately going like, what's right? They want to know how to exactly. We just said, do it. Like what skills do you think you have that should go across the top around, these kind of 21st century skills. It was really interesting to see what they came up with. But it was very thought-provoking for the students. A lot of people that we talked about this with within our cohort of institutions said, we just want to do this exercise. We should probably do this with like every student, just right out of the gate, to help students, again, create some awareness around skills and then understand their own skills. And we believe that if we use something like this framework with employers, you're kind of feeding in from both sides, right? So students are actually being able to like elevate and display their own skills, and then employers can actually feed into a T to say, if you're going for this job, these are the skills that really matter, both up and down and across the T, right? So we could get to a point where it's a translation tool and a matching tool for students and employers, which is, again, for folks who are talking about the town and gown and the employer partnerships, right? How do we get to that point, right? Because it's one thing to just get people at the table, but we have to break down the walls that currently exist, particularly around HR, to be able to talk about what if we can get to this point where you're feeding in from a job perspective and students can then see some visibility around that and create their own. Let me hop ahead here for a second just to show you that we actually put that in front of employers, right? So this is what we do at the lab. It's like, let's not just bake something and then like let it fly, but let's put it now in front of a bunch of employers. So when I was out in Michigan, a month or so ago, that's what we did. And that's a picture of them like staring at it right there, so, and going like, and asking like some critical questions about like, what are we doing here? What is this thing? But what you'll see on the right-hand side, and I know it's difficult to see, but we asked them, once they understood the framework of the badge and what a T profile looked like, we said, how would you use that in the hiring process? And the up and down is, at the top is high importance in the hiring process, and the bottom is low importance. And on the left is early in the process, and the right is late in the process. So you'll see that they put the T profile high importance and early. Right? So it could be a really early, important signal for them, and badges are sort of right behind that. And by the way, bottom left corner, cover letter, right? So, that thing that every job asks for is of least importance to employers, right? Yet they still ask for it. So, what's clear is that employers want something different. They're hungry for something new, and, we're trying to feed into that and test some ideas. 100% of the employers said they could support this type of framework. These are the Michigan employers. 80% said they'd like continue to enjoy to join in an advisory group to like explore further with it because they felt so compelled, you know, both by it and to meet their own needs that they need to go further. And then finally, 75% said they liked this T-profile concept. Others were like, you know, critical of it because they were just saying things like, which are really important. I don't want it to be self-reported. Right? Because then we're back to where we were with the resume. Like that student who just says, yes, I've got these skills. Well, we're arguing that, no, you don't just like list the skills across the top you have, but if you've got a badge, then that is a verifiable signal that you've actually earned it. Right? So we have to get to a point where you're like earning the skills and showing that you've actually done things to be able to like signal and say, yes, I have the critical thinking skill, or I have oral communication. Okay. So one final piece, and I'm going to kind of blow through this because you know, I want to leave some time for questions because it looks like people might have questions. What might this look like if you put this on a campus, right? If we start to think about who could own this, right? Which group on campus? So we started saying, well, what about career services? And we say that because just about every school, actually every school that's participated in the cohort always has somebody from career services on the team. So it's not as if they're not contributing to the conversation here. We actually see this as a great opportunity. So what if career services became the facilitator, right, for these 21st century skills, which means you're sort of in many ways an incubator, right? So you're plugging into all the opportunities on campus, both inside and outside of the classroom, the students can engage in. What if they introduced the idea of the T-shaped learner? And again, if I was going to add a word in there, I'd say early. Introduce that early. Right? Imagine giving, and this is one thing that did not come up at all, and as somebody who was on the high school side, I would challenge people to think about their plans in this way. What are you doing to reach back? We already talked a lot about what happens after college, right, and staying connected to your alum, but very little, and maybe I missed it, but not too many people are talking about how we reach back to high schools, right? So what if, when you know students are coming your way, because you know that before school starts, that you do have students who are coming to you, right, as freshmen, what if you gave them all 360? And you asked them to get rated on that 360 and across these skills. Imagine the data that you have right now for incoming students around the skills that matter. And you could use that as a developmental plan, right? It signals a lot of things. It signals to the student that, boy, this school really cares, and that these skills are now on their radar, right? So there's a lot of things that signals to folks if you were to do something like that. So we just, you know, we're trying to experiment and expand our thinking around what the potential for this could be. And then you get to the point where you're skill tagging, right? So that Business 101 class, I get the content, but what about the skills? You know, are we listing the skills that are being practiced in that class? So if I'm a student at some point, I can search not just by the course, but by skills I want to build, right? So I'm going, I want to build collaboration skills. Boom, all the classes that have been kind of tagged with that come up. I can filter by major or whatever, shrinks down to 2 or 3 classes. That's going to help me. And then, again, these offerings are required for all students at any point, maybe even for credit, right? So, like, could career services be this champion of this type of experience and journey where they're really the connection point for the types of activities that feed into these types of skill building? All right, so I'm going to pause and just leave that up there. But you can, if you can't see it in the back, in what ways might your institution intentionally, use that word a lot, increase awareness around 21st century skills? Allow students to intentionally practice with, stealing Dr. Ora's term there, articulated precision, which I really like, inside and outside of the classroom, and then finally, leverage existing programs, right? So nobody's saying you build from scratch, but you think about things like work study, study abroad. You know, oh, going to Barcelona is great, right? But what if you had like a framework around like, I will build empathy and cross-cultural competency when I'm on this trip, right? So just reframing through a skills lens for many things that students are involved in. Like that's the world in which we need to get to. So I'm just going to leave that up there, and now we'll open it to see if people have questions. And drink some water.
So I'll just say, I think that this idea about the 360 for freshmen coming in, I think it's a wonderful idea. We don't, there may be pre-testing for math and for reading.
right.
We don't tend to track critical thinking skills when they enter. We don't tend to go, oh, well, you know what? Critical thinking skills on this class, and you give a rating. We don't tend to do those things, or with the other skills that you had listed up there. So I think that's a great idea, and particularly the idea of having badges or listings for different classes. There's skills, specific skills you can see in the course catalog, or when you're registering. Okay. So as I look at my course listings for the semester, I can see all the different skills that I'm encountering
Right,
in that
and
semester.
building over time, right? Exactly. Like if we can get visibility around that, one of the things that I talk about a lot, and we use this analogy, is how many people are familiar with Fitbits?
Yes.
Yes, right. So everybody in my household has them. My little 7 and 9-year-old, they beat me every day. Want to know how many steps I got? How many steps, Dad? I got like 2,000 steps, and they've got 20,000. But what has Fitbit done for health and wellness, right? It has you thinking about that more intentionally, right? Like, I'm going to get 10,000 steps. I'm going to get off the bus 2 stops early and walk 2 extra blocks, right, to get more steps. So it's actually changing behavior because I got this slick app that I can look at that reminds me. Like, how can we get to that world around these types of skills?
Okay. I just had a question about the courses when you talk about skill tagging. Are you going through all of your courses, or are you identifying specific courses that may give the most skills, or how do you determine which courses you do that with?
Yeah, so we actually haven't done it yet, although we have a couple of schools that are lined up in this sort of next phase of the work, and if you're interested in hearing more about or learning more how to get involved, you should just reach out. But around this idea of skill tagging, we've talked about that, particularly within certain schools. So they want to like kind of open up the books to say like, let's just do a go through and see what we think, right, we're building as far as skills go, and then try and do some mapping. So that's some work, right? But if you're talking about the intractability of getting a professor to like change his or her curriculum, right? Could it start with just asking a professor to say, which skills do you think are being built? And tag it, right? And just as a starting point, as a talking point for your institution to see like, hey, you get a survey back, and now I'm looking at like what people think, right, of these skills are being practiced in their class. Could be a good starting point.
So a little bit of a shameless plug and a question. So we're talking about how, right? Everyone who's met me, I'm Frederick. I'm with Better Weekdays. This is what we do. So I would love to partner with your lab, with any school that wants to map their courses to skills. We have built artificial intelligence, machine learning to do this and kickstart that. It is free for schools, all right? So my question then is, what do you feel the schools, because we've in these workshops, we've talked about the other barriers, the faculty buy-in, we've talked about the curriculum things. What do you feel is key when it comes to engaging with students, that if the skills are out there and the students understand, how does that connect with the other things that the group has talked about? Do you imagine any other hurdles or barriers that schools need to be thinking about?
Yeah, so in relation to hurdles, I think the largest hurdle really does get down to if you're trying to get to the point of like offering credit, for example, right? Or put something on a transcript, right? Those types of actions really require a lot of conversation, right? Faculty senate or the registrar, or so those are some of the challenges. And some schools are, for the cohort so far, they've been working outside of the classroom, so they haven't had to do that. But some have started to imagine that, well, if the students did about 15 hours of learning, that's equal to 1 credit, right? And this was University of Arizona, for example. And so they structured it out of the gate to be about 15 hours of learning, but they're not ready to sort of like push to the next level around like, how do we make this for credit, right? But they've got it in mind. So I think there will be some challenges getting to that point, for certain schools. And then the business model around it, like they didn't want to see, they couldn't see that as something they would charge for, right? They were like, that's something we should probably be doing for students, not charging students to do. So that was one of their rubs. But then when we said to her, well, what about for alumni? She's like, oh yeah, we could charge them. So if you were like an alum, but really you think about like how you could offer something like these skill badges to your alum who maybe didn't get it, or now recognize like I need to get better at, right? That could be a business opportunity, right, for a school to be able to like pull alums back in and continue to offer value to them.
You noted that you have defined the requirements for a number of badges. Are those requirements accessible to this group?
Yeah, so these badges are not, and that's a great point, I didn't say this, but these are not badges that are only available to our cohort of schools, right? They are getting attribution for participating in the design of them. But we always went into this as open badges. So if you're at all familiar with badging, there's a group that's subscribed to the open network concept, right? So that anybody anywhere should be able to access these badges regardless of the school that he or she goes to, or even if they're not in school. But for right now, we are in the point of getting to, now that we've created the suite, to then push them out. So we're kind of refining again, like V2, so that then we can get them sort of available for the at-large institutions. So you can see, what these are all about. There's transparency is critical, right? So we're not trying to hide anything. We're trying to show people, and that's what badges do and allow you to do that a traditional degree doesn't, because what I see is a transcript, but I can't really see underneath the transcript. But with a badge, the metadata associated with that allows me to see, right, what a student is doing to earn that badge. So we're very much trying to be transparent about it as well.
Yesterday, when we heard a lot about discipline-specific kinds of competencies, so I'm wondering, at my institution or any institution, should we ask our faculty to develop the processes to come up with discipline-specific competencies and the ways to evaluate those? So if we, for example, in our university college, we teach students to develop rubrics, and then they use the rubrics to evaluate whether or not they have critical thinking. Okay, and we also use the collegiate learning assessment. So we have 2. So that's what I'm asking you. So because that was the thread since yesterday, Ed, I've been thinking about these discipline-specific competencies. How do we empower faculty to develop the processes to promote those? And then in turn, what's the best way to assess it when it's discipline-specific?
So, when you think about the skills that we're developing, right, and around our badging challenge, we went into this identifying the ones that we felt and industries and research were saying are the most important, regardless of the industry you're going into, right? These are the core skills. So that was our lens and our focus going into this work. Now, if you kind of roll it back or want to like reverse engineer into that across disciplines, i.e. majors, then you want to be able to use frameworks that exist that you can put in front of faculty to say, think about these. You don't want like multiple languages and frameworks being created. We need to get to a point where we have uniformity around language, and that's part of what we're doing at the lab. In fact, Kathleen's leading a working group through Lumina's Connecting Credentials work around aligning supply and demand signals, and part of that is really getting to like some common language, right, that we can all be referring to. So we're not trying to create additional language. We're kind of looking at what people are saying and then building off of that. So I would encourage, if you're going to do anything with your faculty, is to like, don't just like open it up and ask them to think about like, what do you think is being built, but rather like put a framework in front of them that they can kind of respond to and react to. Dr. Lomax.
Yeah, so I'm speaking as a former English teacher, and having taught at two of our institutions that are here for a long time in the English department, where that's a service department as well as an it's as well as a major. And a lot of the service work is, we encounter in English departments, we encounter most of the students who attend an institution from first year and during the first and second year of their undergraduate experience. And I wonder to what extent, as we think about these skills, we think about really inviting a department like the English department to be actively involved in this, because so much of the skills that we're talking about are communication skills, and they're being sought to be developed in ways that we don't do. We don't develop them in the department. When I was an undergraduate, these many years ago, you took a year of composition, and then you did also take a semester of public speaking. But the formats for both of those were utterly unrelated to the kinds of experiences that we're challenging students to prepare for here. So that if you think about it, I was out in Silicon Valley for the last summit that we did last fall, and I watched students from, including my alma mater and the institution where I had taught, I watched them do their pitches. And I thought they were okay, but I didn't think they were very good. And I thought if I'd asked them to do, Martin Luther King's, I Have a Dream speech, that they'd knocked it out of the park. But that's not what they're being challenged to do any longer. They're being asked to do 2-minute, what did you call it? You called it a napkin statement or something, or whatever it is. So these are communications formats and opportunities. And I think that there's a really, if I were back in the English department today, I would be hungry for, being invited by my colleagues who are working on this career pathway to invite me in to be part of the team that is rethinking how elements of what I do every day can really be more effective for the students. So I think there's a big opportunity to get some more resources within the faculties, and also give them then ownership and let them become part of the, they can evangelize for this career pathway, because they're going to see themselves on it as well. They're going to see room for themselves. And then when we do these co-curricular things and we're sending not just our students, but we're sending our faculty into residencies, why wouldn't you send somebody from the English department who in and being a part of the human development team at Google and learning what is they're looking for when they talk about communications and listening and all those things. What is it that they want? Then I would go back and say maybe there's some new research and other opportunities for me to not only develop some new courses to address needs that my students have today, but to develop some new expertise and proficiency that makes me an even more valuable part of that community. I think we run the risk of making the sort of the thems and the us's who are in this work, and then all the rest of them are thems, and we need it to be everybody. And we need everybody in the faculty to evangelize for it. And I think that if they feel engaged, they're more likely to do it.
Absolutely, yeah, and I think it goes back to the example of the college access. Like in that case, like everybody was doing it, right? Like every hallway was named after a college, right? Everybody was championing that, so everybody does need to be a part of it and get excited about the ability and the opportunity to get our students to the point where they are better prepared to enter the world of work. Well, I think that's all the questions. So thank you all for letting me close it out here, at least.